Welcome to the PantheonPlus Rewind. Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome to episode 49 of The Rewind. If you joined us last week for part 1 of Therek's sit-down with JN Gerhart, then you know today finishes our conversation with Pantheon's lead writer. Last week, we finished up the show by going through 6 of the available 12 classes currently being planned for launch, and talking about how each one of them were specific to the lore of Terminus and how they fit. Today we'll pick up with the final 6 and get into some more details after. But before I do, I want to give a shout out to all of those that supported the show last week with donations. We like to call them our dungeon group for the week. So a heartfelt thanks goes out to Sparrow, our Elven Druid, Bounty Code, our Human Paladin, Crowsinger, our Halfling Druid, and Redbeard Flynn as our Darkmere Monk. Now I will have to also give him a special shout out that if Necro is available, he'll probably be a Darkmere Necro. Now, I also want to give a big thank you to Nathan Hawkins, who applauded while watching on demand. Nathan, let us know your class and race choices in Discord, and we can add you to next week's group. As a reminder, you are always able to download this show on Spotify or iTunes if you listen on the go. And I also think it's important to note that whether you donate or not, we want to make sure that everyone who supports us knows how thankful we are. Whether it's following us on Twitter, following us on Twitch, YouTube subscribing, which is all free, and just sharing our videos out there with the world. We are very thankful for that and everything that you do as a community. We're nothing without you guys, and we don't get an opportunity like this to talk to JN without the credibility that you all bring. I say that because it is very true, and I want you to know how important everyone who spends time listening to us is. Thank you. So with that said, let's get rocking with part 2 of Therek's interview with JN Gerhart.
The Shaman is an interesting one. The thing I've noticed about the Shaman and what we've seen, because we've seen quite a bit of it and the lore surrounding it, it's quite focused on, I want to say time travel per se. It's cliche, but more like the control, the manipulation of time. Is that accurate or am I off on that?
It's more finding a way through time and almost like echoes of time.
Right.
I mean, there is an time walking and walking the ages and all that is definitely a part of the class. I think it's narratively one of the most interesting when it comes to perception related stuff, because Terminus is a very old planet, and kind of like how the rogue is able to have conversations that can eavesdrop on and hear different things. The shaman will have, not to a way that it feels like, you want to just min-max a shaman perception-wise because they're the best, but that there are little things that they're able to do because they're able to
right.
peer through the kind of ages of time. But it's not in this like fully realized, like you're suddenly in another time. Right. It's more like if you imagine, whether it's arcane energy or it's like the echoes of the time that were before are still present in the current time. Not to kind of quote Gladiator, but like there's that aspect to it, and shamans are just intuitively sensitive to that, and so
sort of like like conduits or like sort of the dowsing rod for like that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And clerics, I thought were really interesting. When I did a video a little while ago, sort of, because I was trying to extrapolate this stuff from the classes, from the information we had, but the clerics and the paladin as well, they're sort of related because they're very connected to their deity. They're very deity focused, and that's traditionally been a facet of those two classes. But in Pantheon, because of the situation with the deities, it's really different. How would you sort of how would you phrase that or frame that for clerics and paladins?
So for kind of going back to what I said about wizards, where the spell is at the heart of who they are and what they do and their skill set and their abilities. For clerics, if you're a person of any kind of faith and you imagine there being a sundering or a severance from any impression your deity could make on you in any way, shape, or form, then the texts that you have that are authored by, evidenced of, lived in your deity would become all the more sacred and all the more important. And when you kind of take the thinking of a spell being this encapsulation of power written out in words, basically just, power in words, in speech, in motion. The same is true for scripture. So you have words that are powerful and alive in a way that, just normal writing is not. And so for clerics, the reliance on script and scripture is incredibly important, and the ability to recite those things not just in word but in like heart, like to exhale those things, is incredibly important, because that's really the only connection you have to your deity, is the work of their hands, their work that's lingering. So people come, people go, temples come, temples fall, and yet that script is still there. So for them, it's a reliance on that, and then also traditions and things like that as well that would be influenced by that.
Right. And paladins were clerics. I can't remember what it is exactly. I think it's documented. They were clerics and they've gone a different path. Is that the paladins sort of deal?
Yeah, they were once a cleric, but may have been some of the most zealous clerics, and when faced over and over again with the iniquity, the evil, just loss, whatever it may be, whatever the trigger or the severing was, whether it was one thing or a bunch of things, their path has taken them from a contemplative state to a more aggressive state. And their way of changing the world is not espousing doctrine and having that shape their life and shape their heart, but instead picking up a double-sided hammer and going to town on the undead. Like there's a way that what's affected their heart has caused them to shift to being much more overt with their power and feeling like that's actually the purpose of these things. And usually there's a subversion of truth to some degree, where it's been taken for their own and changed because they've any number of things that's affected them, that's caused them to move outside of the clerical order into what they would say is a much more direct outworking of the principles of their faith. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Druids, I find really interesting from a lore perspective, because they have that connection specifically with the halfling race. Something I've noticed is that there's quite a strong connection between them and the halflings. But Druids, can be other races as well. What's the lore behind the Druid class?
So, yes, there's halfling influence for sure, and there's kind of a unique reason for that has to do with the halfling pantheon. But I will not go too deeply into that. But yeah, with Druids, there's just a heart of cultivation and of preservation and of order that is just different than cultural order. And so if you imagine, like, if nature was its own government and nature was its own authority and nature was its own society, and we obeyed that order and that society rather than the ones we grew up in, that's a Druid, where they're able to connect on an even emotional level with nature. And then there's just this compatibility and this synthesizing of their goals and their aims and that of nature. And it's obviously a wild class, but it's also I think it's the one I think of as being one of the warmest and most inviting classes. Not that there can't be evil, dark-hearted druids, but it has that sort of aspect to it to me. So
yeah, I can agree with that. I think most of the druids I've met in my life have been pretty decent people, pretty warm and friendly folks.
Yes.
And what about rangers? Rangers being a class that's obviously close to my heart. Lots of interesting things to say about rangers, I'm sure.
Yeah. I guess they're the best class, and that's all that needs to be said.
There you go.
They're certainly not like those rogues.
No, much different than the rogue.
Rangers, I think, are, I just think that they've got a relationship to. I'm just waiting in my heart for Minus to chime in. So that's.
Well, he's pinging me in messages. He's
Oh yeah, okay. Man,
he's giving me the thinking face in
Yes.
messages here. So
So Rangers are trying to take what are seen as, I guess, an enemy in the world, which are, or at least subservient aspects of the world when it comes to animals, beasts, those sorts of things, and bring them into a uniquely utilitarian tool. And so, whereas a druid is, like I said, kind of like almost raised by the society of nature, you've got a druid that's kind of like delving into it like a toolkit, and but also has that heart, that wilderness in their heart. I like to think of Rangers as being eclectic and being eccentric in the way that they see the world and approach the world, but a lot of times not getting that respect, because they're able to use a tool that everybody should use, which is whether it's a bow or nature, and make it work. And they bring these different elements together to survive, to thrive, and to bring a lot of damage.
nice.
So I just think of them as like being like a jackknife, or not a Swiss Army knife, sorry,
Right.
where there's all these different things that they are able to do. And I just had a lot of personality. That class has a lot of personality to me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's music to my ears. Cannot wait. I love it. And then last but not least is the summoner. It's sort of a different kind of class. What's the lore behind the summoner?
So summoners are kind of, I feel like they're a little bit more reserved than an enchanter, and then not having quite the academic reputation of a wizard, but having the most incredible ability to be able to pull things and manifest things in this world, and just having pets and having different tools. Then, I mean, a little bit like a ranger in that sense, like you've got something that's working with you, but
Right.
that really being a major part of your identity. I think it's just, in some ways, it's the most cleanly fantastical class, because you can draw correlations to a lot of things in our world that the other classes do. And there's nobody that can, manifest an elemental in our world. Obviously, nobody can cast a freezing spell, but there's like, that one seems to be maybe just so common in fantasy that you just kind of are it's normalized. But summoners, I just think are wild and unique in what they're able to do. And so, again, unique cast of characters,
Awesome.
and opportunities there. So
very, very cool. Yeah, I like that aspect of the summoner too, sort of thinking the fantasy of the fantasy class, you know what I mean? So so for you, are you gonna, what's your class? I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever asked you that in any interview you've done, but I'm interested in terms of what your class you think you'd play in a game like this.
Try really hard to not pick favorites. It works well with my children to not pick favorites, and it works well talking publicly. But I will say, don't let me off the hook. I will say that the monk resonates with me, but I'm honestly, and this is not pandering, I am most excited to play a ranger. I can say that. I can say the one I'm most excited to play.
I could hear it in your voice when you were talking about the ranger. I just sense it. We Rangers have a sense for things like this. So.
Exactly right. Of course.
That's fantastic. All right. So let's shift gears and talk about the world of Terminus a little bit. And I'm going to keep it general for people that may not have the sort of in-depth sort of been following it as closely as I have. And so we'll stick to the big picture stuff a little bit. But, in a game like this, but there's always like the foundational texts that set the stage for what's happened in the world or what's going to happen in the world. What's the most canonical text in Pantheon, and what would you, if somebody wants to learn the basics, what should they be looking at?
So I don't have a great answer for this yet. The most reliable source will be anything that comes from the Keeper, because the Keeper is trying to, and think of the Keeper as an office more than a person. The Keeper is trying to steward truth, and that is going to, by its nature, have multiple different perspectives on an event, or be open to being wrong at different times, and also, kind of most fundamentally, not being a shill, and so not trying to prop up another specific race or a specific person, or a specific outcome. So right now, I can just say that, like, as far as like a book or a collection of books that will be the authority, I would just still look for the Keeper, because most of the stuff that we've put out, whether it's been clear or not, has kind of been the Keeper's voice, and tried to be the Keeper's narrative. Yeah,
that's interesting you say that, because I found that too, that I thought that was the case most of the time when I'm reading or listening to the lore. And sometimes I wasn't sure if it was coming from the Keeper's perspective, but knowing that is very, I think that's important. I think that's valuable to know that it's coming from this perspective of the Keeper. And I like how you said he's not a shill, because it makes me think of that one line from I think the basic, the first thing the Keeper writes is talking about Festus of Hybrace, was bought and sold, and he's resisted these things, and he's tried to avoid the influence of nobility and that kind of thing. So very, very cool. What about, and dragons are a huge fantasy icon. They're in almost every high fantasy story, and people love them, including myself. One of the books that I read growing up were the Dragonlance novels by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I loved their take on dragons, and I know that it wasn't the most unique thing, but there was something about them that I really loved. So it's hard to come up with sort of original ways of integrating dragons into a high fantasy setting. So my question is, in Pantheon's lore, coming up with the dragons and the Rainborn, what was your starting point? What was your thought process to sort of set them apart?
So, one of the best tricks that I've learned from somebody in sales was the value of the takeaway, and that once, whether you're in a negotiation or you're talking to somebody, you can almost instantly increase something's value by removing it. And when I first got on the team, there were a number of things that I wanted to, like, either do subversions of the trope or to take away a little bit. And one of those was dragons. And so, like, dragons are so ubiquitous in fantasy. The first thing that I felt like we should do is pull them off of the main stage in some way. And like, when you're in game, I wanted the moment you came across a dragon to be so significant that you were like, oh my goodness. And if you knew the history behind that dragon, great. But if you didn't, you still felt like, I'm actually in front of a dragon. Rather than it being, like, okay, here's the biggest of the dragons, because I've already fought 5 of them, on King's Reach. And so now I'm just fighting the main dragon. And so that was kind of fundamentally where we started. CP again, and I worked really closely with the initial idea of the Rainborn, and got, like, the hierarchy with Rochnilthamos. We wanted there to be this top tier, pushing the boundaries of mortality dragon in Rochnilthamos, and we wanted that. And then I love variation. I think it's compelling when you've got variations on a theme, and so the different branches of dragonkind that just kind of flowed naturally out of this king who had defeated the enemies of his branch, his wing of dragonkind. You've got this bastardized version in the Dragons of the Earth, and then you've got the dragons of the sea,
Mhm.
and the idea there of just having this almost nobility amongst the dragons, but them all being, not pledging allegiance to, but put in office by Roknilthamos.
Right.
The idea there was to give them an appropriate amount of power and presence, so that when we remove them, it felt like it was significant, not just like the dragons are gone, but that there's actually this structure, this order, this this power behind the power. That's another idea that's compelling to me.
Yeah.
As a kid, that there's something behind that thing, and there may be something behind that thing. And so, yeah, there's that. But then there's a ton of other stuff, like when Telnarsis just riffs on all of the different like dragon types.
Love that part. Yeah, I love that part.
Those are all things under Rock. Those are all dragon types underneath Roknilthamos, and he uses them in all kinds of different ways. But then there's also dragons that we've not talked about that are not aligned with Roknilthamos. There are other types of dragons that are out there that are outliers in some ways. So yeah, the goal was to make them significant and kind of give you like a point that if you're just somebody who knows nothing about our world and you're coming into a fantasy MMO and you're like, my friends are playing and that's cool, but that whatever your expectations are, there's kind of a breakwater on that, and you go, where are the dragons? Why aren't there dragons? And hopefully somebody tells you, because dragons are gone.
Yeah.
And then you begin to build an appreciation for that in world.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, power behind the power. Love that phrase. That when I read the story about, the Marthas Bosimir's, testimony or his observation of that moment that ended the Deicide War, and he talks about, first the Rai Kafiros comes out of the mountain.
Yep.
Yeah, and then Roknilthamos. I may be getting it wrong, but anyway, 2 dragons, and then there's always this next layer of power, right? And then that mysterious force that we don't know about yet sort of has a conversation between Roknilthamos and that presence, I guess you would say. Really speaks to what you're saying about the impact of that power behind the power. I think that's a great way of doing it, and very, very well structured and very impactful. You mentioned Telnarsis. I just have to comment about Telnarsis. When he has that conversation in the Night of Five Voices, you kind of get the sense that he's, maybe this is just my takeaway, but he's kind of a rebel. He's kind of like the misfit of the dragons, I guess you would say. Is that sort of intended, or is that sort of like, his persona is a little different?
No, that's intended. Yeah, he's been defrocked.
Right.
He has done a thing that caused him to be kind of kicked out of the hierarchy, I would say. So he had a certain place. He was not a Rainborn, and has lost that place. And he's kind of just stewing on that and plotting for hundreds of years. So yeah, he has a unique story, which will be discoverable in game. And then so he's a different bird, so to speak.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. I like him already.
Good.
Yeah. So we talked about deities a little earlier when we were talking about the clerics and the paladins, and a game called Pantheon. Obviously, deities play a very important role. In the latest evaluation build, we got the Book of the Avaloth for the human Pantheon of Gods, and it's great, like so detailed. And are we going to get that kind of thing for other races? Are we going to be able to discover that in game with a sort of detailed outpouring of information about their pantheon, or is it going to be more some yes, some no, or is that sort of like the humans are just sort of different like that?
No, humans are not different like that. Those all exist for every race. They have for some time, and they'll definitely be discoverable in game. I would imagine they'll be published before the game launches. It was just an opportunity to put that in there, because I was not thinking about any of that being streamed. Not that I didn't think it would at some point, but the purposes of the eval dungeon was experiential, which dovetails very well with streaming if it's done right. But I wanted depth, and I wanted there to feel like you were able to learn something about the humans in this, outpost of Thronefast.
Right.
And so that's what that was there for. But no, all of them have it. Even the scar, that all of the sides of the 9 god, and
right.
so the scar have the 9 god and then the 9 hates, and without going too much into that. Yeah, they're called. Which I that's one of my favorite pantheons is the scar, because it's just got a lot of depth.
I can't wait to hear about it some more. That's fantastic. I've been trying to piece together the ogre pantheon for the longest time. From the dev roundtable you did, you named a few of the different tribes and the different. So I'm trying to fit all these things together and discover them. But there's a lot of them. Each race has quite a few, right? So it's not an easy task.
Yeah, I have not added up how many there are. But yeah, it's a lot, and then you've got deities that are native to Terminus as well. There's a whole lot of god making going on here.
Interesting. Well, deities native to Terminus, that's the next question I sort of had. I want to talk a little bit, just a question about some of the native races of the planet. You've said before, like, the planet's had several different names going all the way back to Noah, before Nistarok, that kind of thing. And Azovul, I always get it backwards.
Avazul.
Yes. I always switch the V and the Z around for some reason. Anyway, one of the races that the lore talks about is the Tholen, and they've been left pretty undetailed, other than they invented the current calendar. Is there anything details you can share about the Tholen, or something that you might not have know about yet?
I don't know that I can say too much about them, because they are. I mean, they will have a home in game that at some point will be adventurable to. They are a pretty isolated group that is ancient. I mean, they can trace their lineage back cleanly, probably almost as far back as anyone. Like not Spriggan quite that far, but
right.
They're able to trace their roots back pretty far. And so, like with the Jagana, where it gets muddy pretty quickly, and giants get, it devolves into like myth and uncertainty, and one group will tell you one thing, or another group will tell you something a little bit different. The Tholen are not global. They don't spread around the world. They've been able to protect and preserve their way of life for a long time, and that's very important to them. And so they have a lot of respect in the world, but then also very little known about them, because they're just not looking to advance their culture or anything like that. They're more concerned with big events like the naming of a calendar, because they would chart that and they would have records of when these sort of age-defining or shifting moments happened,
right.
And that's part of their role.
So in game, if I want to learn more about the lore, they're the ones I should seek out. I should go and find them and then ask them some questions.
Yes, and if they're willing to tell you, then kudos to you.
Gotcha. Well, I'll be as much of a perception nerd as you can possibly be. I'll do everything I can to get my keeper status up. So they won't talk to me. They won't talk to anyone.
There you go. Awesome.
Right on. Yeah. So the Deicide War was one of those major events, like you talked about, that the Tholen are interested in. In the races constructed the sanctums, which you described. I love this line that you use. It's coffins to outlast the night. It's a great line. So we know the burning sanctum, the frozen sanctum, the silent sanctum. There's mention of the Ashen Sanctum in Ogre lore. Now, and if that's like something that, if that's change and retcon sort of thing like we were talking about earlier, that's interesting. But I noticed it when I was reading the Ogre race history. Is the Ashen Sanctum a thing? And, can you tell us a little bit more about, like, if it is, like, what a little lore about it?
It is most definitely the Burning Sanctum that was not changed. It was not correctly updated. So the excitement there, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
So that was written like way early on, even before the Ashen Elves were a thing, or maybe an idea, but they hadn't really taken full form. And so that has just not been changed. So we're going to have to change that.
That's fair. I'm glad I asked, because
totally the Burning Sanctum is what that became.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, burning ash, kind of similar stuff.
Yes.
I'm guilty of like, I go back and find forum posts from you in like 2016. So if you see in my video, I quote stuff from like, you responded to somebody on the forum saying this or that. And I'm so, that's on me. That's not on you. You can't really be accountable for stuff you said, 5-6 years ago.
Well, if it's on the ogre lore right now, which I'm going to have to look up when we're done here, I'll have to get that changed, because that is totally 100% on me.
Fair enough. When it comes to the elves, Amber and Ashen, the sub races, it's the only real race that has the two subtypes. There are other races that might support that kind of subcategory in the lore, and is that something that you've explored at any point doing, or is it just the elves for now?
For right now, it is just the elves, and I don't think we have any plans to open that up. There's a fundamental, even a physiological way that following Ember or Ashen paths are truly different and distinct, and it's more than just a faction. So probably any race we could look at, and like the Halflings have the Nothi, the S-Caps, and Maiden Clan, and we could theoretically make all three of those unique. But one, we're not looking to do that extra work unnecessarily, and it's just always felt right for the elves. And I know like every game has the crucible of like equity and balance in it, and I know anytime you make a decision like this, you are going to have members of the fan base, and they're totally fine to do this, and maybe even totally justified to do this, that don't like it and feel like it is a variation that is, if it's not reproducible, it's somehow wrong or off or whatever. And I totally am sympathetic to that and get that, and have made my own case in X number of games over X number of years for whatever my reasons were. But for us, that's just always been, it's just been right for the elves. And especially within a, like, the triumvirate of fantasy races, elves being, if not chief among them, darn close. To bring some sort of uniqueness to them and to that experience, like I said, it's just always felt right. Because nobody has ever done elves with a big tree, ever. So,
yeah, you got to differentiate a little in there. You got to find avenues for differentiation.
Yes, that was another one where I was like, I didn't know WoW at all. Like, I didn't know. Have you heard of Tell Yourself? Like, no, I haven't. Tell me all about
I'm in the same boat. I tell this to Minus all the time. I'm not a WoW player. I never played WoW, so all these references are lost on me a little bit too. But I mean, elves with a big tree, that goes across a few different titles, I guess you would say.
Yes.
That's awesome, though. It's okay. So last question on this, and I have to ask this one because there's somebody in the community that I'm friends with, and he writes a lot of fan fiction. And he's convinced that the humans of Terminus are playing us all, basically, that the keeper's corrupt, that the humans are actually evil beings who are writing Terminus's history. So I need you to set it straight that the humans are not the worst of the worst when it comes to, writing Terminus's history, and not pulling the wool over our eyes is, I guess, what I would say.
I don't know why I would ever confirm that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a no comment. I get it. A strong no comment there. I think that probably makes him pretty happy, actually.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I'm going to finish up there. 2 more questions. They're both sort of fun questions that I had to ask. And the first one is about the gnomes and their clothing. The makesh, is that the proper pronunciation for it? So how, if the gnomes weren't wearing their makesh, what would they look like? How would that be represented in game?
A bit like a gummy bear with a strobe light inside of it.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. That is fantastic imagery.
Pretty much what it is, yeah.
I love
that. Aside from that, it would. So the makesh serves the purpose of, in a similar way to an Archive's outer husk, of like really giving form to the it's not anthropomorphic. It's what is the word I'm looking for? That's like anyway, it gives form not to the totally formless, but to the kind of ambiguous when it comes to shape. And so they their energy, and it's kind of a dense, hard energy, but that is also part of their being. And without getting too much into how gnomes are birthed or formed, there is a need to have that from cradle to grave, really. It's something that is akin to skin for them, or mummy wrappings, I guess you could say, in some thoughts or contexts. But so it's a naked gnome is just makesh and like gloves and boots. It's just very like that. Or the gummy bear with a strobe light.
I like the gummy bear with the strobe light. I'm going to stick with that one.
With that and just said
it's just hard to get out of your brain once it's in there.
Yes. Visceral imagery. That's what we're about at Visionary Realm.
Exactly. Visceral imagery. I like it. Okay. So last question then. The curse that the halflings is basically halted them halfway, by my reading. That's kind of why they're called halflings in terms of their age and their growth maturity process. Now, was it halted before or after they could grow facial hair? Because if halflings can have beards, then I know somebody's gonna be really happy with that. So is it before or after they could do that?
Canonically, I would say it is before. I don't know. I don't think we will have the plan to have halflings have beards. But this random person that I have no idea who they are or would be. I hate to disappoint them, but as of right now, we don't have a plan to do that.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, yep. I guess that it is what it is. I guess it's just, sometimes you just got to accept it. But that's awesome. No, thank you for humoring me with that silly question, because it is very important though to some people. And Jan, I could come up with crazy questions all day, but we do have to wrap things up at some point. This is probably a good place to do that. But before we do, I want to take a moment just to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk to me here. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything else, the listeners might want to know, or anything I didn't ask you about that, you had on your lore brain that you wanted to share with us?
I don't think so. I don't think I have anything that is burning in my brain to share. I just want to say I'm incredibly thankful for the amount of interest that's out there in the community in general for what we're doing story-wise. Thank you to you and to PantheonPlus at large for stewarding that interest and a lot of times guiding it and directing it. Chris Kane, for the incredible amount of work that he's done and passion he's poured into that. That is, as of right now, in some cases, one of the best ways to get into parts of the story that we've got. And that's for a studio that, you don't want to be defined by what you can't do. And for us to pour the resources into that is just not the best use of our energy and time. And so to have somebody in the community that does that, whether it's someone like him or you, that takes these things that are really foreign just by nature of the fact that they're a new creation. They're foreign to everyone, and try to give them a language and an entry point with your personality or your production that allows other people to access the content is such an incredible gift. And yeah, I mean, I'm so thankful and encouraged by that there's still interest in this world even after several years. So
Right.
I can't say enough for the members of the community that do that, and you and people like Chris are chief among them. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all that I have to say.
That's fantastic. No, thank you very much. I mean, this is all stems from your work and your writing, and I've been playing, games for a lot of years, like since I was a kid, and I'm 44 years old now, and it's like I've read a lot of lore, and I can tell when lore is generic, and I can tell when there's true talent and inspiration behind it, and that when I read your lore, it's something beyond what I've experienced before. And I don't know how you do it. And I kind of don't want to know, because I feel like it's magic, and, I just want to let it be what it is. But I've rarely come across some lore that's as inspirational and as well written and as imaginative as yours and your way of writing it. So thank you so much for doing that, and keep doing it. And we'll keep, I know I will at least keep making content related to the lore, because I really enjoy doing it. So awesome. Thank you so much again, Jan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Therek.
You're welcome. So everybody out there listening, go over to PantheonMMO.com, check out the pledge options. If you want to bring this world to life, that this is a crowdfunded game, and it needs your support. And whether that's through pledging or through following, content and following the monthly developer updates, everything matters. So we'll leave it at that. But until next week, everyone, thanks for joining us today, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube under the name Pantheon Plus. Also, be sure to follow Therek at PantheonTherek on Twitter. Keep up to date on all Pantheon Rise of the Fallen information on www.pantheon.plus, the definitive source for all media of Pantheon. Until next time.